Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. You can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ConversationCast. There are over 150,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. When I went to interview Steven Berkoff, I was maybe a little nervous. I didn't worried. I'd been reading the book that was out at the time, which was part of his series of memoirs, Shopping in the Santa Monica Mall. And that gave me a chance to go in and talk to him about his peripatetic lifestyle.
Well, it is. It's part of the job is to wander. It's also like a kind of migratory thing. You go certain seasons to certain countries, and or you could say it's like pollinating other nations, in your wandering, like the bee. And that's what you do. You take your work and you pollinate it. You spread your seed, your ideas around the world. And so it's necessary to wander. And in doing so, you come across so many different things you never would have seen in ordinary life or would expect to go to, because we tend to kind of choose places we wish to go. But with work, you may say, well, we have a job for you in Madras to do Shakespeare's villains. You might not have necessarily wanted to go, or chosen to go, or to say Brisbane. And so what is interesting about being, in a way, shoehorned or coerced into these places is that it throws up so many unexpected things, because it's something that you hadn't really planned to do. So your mind isn't kind of absorbed or trained, or you haven't got an obsession to visit Paris or New York, because your mind is probably kind of soaked up with all those impressions, and so in a way you're prepared for those places. That's fascinating.
Madras sounds all right.
Yes, it's fascinating, really.
But
yes.
Doncaster doesn't come out so well.
No, Doncaster, Rotherham, those places do. But it's all par for the course, as they say. You go and in a way, I've gone to places in England that have been absolutely terrible, and yet I've gained something from it. In the most terrible situations.
But it's the paucity of English generosity at one point. You've given your all on stage, and the friends of some theatre ask you to come back for a drink.
Oh, you've read it?
Yeah.
Hey, wow, that's great.
Just the one.
Yes, that's fine.
But how do you cope with that?
Well, that was interesting, because it gives you become a kind of anthropologist, a sociologist, studying kind of habits and patterns of people's behaviour, and you find that the British are the most stingiest race in the world, and they're not mean. It's just stinginess, which doesn't necessarily mean evil or kind of malevolent. And other races are very generous and much more malevolent, of course, South American countries, but the English are the stingiest. And I remember this incident in Canterbury, this awful theatre which occasionally, does a little bingo and Red Riding Hood at the Christmas time. And we're doing Salome. And they said, we have the Friends of the Theatre in every town, of course, Friends of the Theatre. And the woman said to me afterwards, oh, what would you like to drink? I hear you like beer. And I said, well, not particularly. I think you got the wrong one. And I was thinking of America, where you're given champagne after the show, or your wonderful cocktails and margaritas. And then when they did find us a drink, eventually, and then when I went to the bar for the second one, I got to pay for the second one. And so the meanness of the British is very, very interesting. And I think, what is it about the Brits that is so ungenerous, so tight-assed? And I think it's a form of self-protectiveness. It's an island. It's always been forced to be on a defensive. And so they close the gates, batten down the hatches, don't give. And I found meanness to such an extent that it's almost been surrealistic. However, but not only are they mean, which is kind of cute, but at the same time they're generous with their spirit in other ways. They're good audiences. They welcome you there. They're pleased. They listen. They absorb it. And that's good. With America, they're very generous, very open. They look after you, and as they have this, they make big banquets and all that stuff, and they probably haven't understood a word that you've done in the play, so that's different.
There's one of the essays in here, one of the chapters called Pool of Light.
Oh, yes.
And if ever you think, why the hell do guys do this? Why the hell do they put themselves through this?
Yes.
And you describe there, sort of clap by clap, what happens at the end of the performance.
Yes.
And the desire to go and stand in that pool of light. And you say that that gives you a satisfaction which film can never do, because people don't clap.
That's right, yes.
So what's going on in your emotional life? Is it a basic kind of visceral thing? Kind of love me? Approve of what I've done? Appreciate what I've done?
Yes, it's partly love me, partly the need. A lot of people do go into the performing arts, have had perhaps a very shaky upbringings, broken families, and when people have done examinations, even psychologists on actors and the nature, what motivates them, they have found a kind of very flawed background whereby you seek the surrogate family in kind of communes of work. So it could be in the dance or the theatre world, or some world where there is a communication between people, and that communication is absolutely vital for the work. In other words, when you're an actor, you have to remember the lines. He has to give you or she, you have to remember and speak them. You have to look in each other's eye, and afterwards you have to say, "Oh, well done, darling." And so there is a kind of family, and that becomes a very interesting and surrogate family. So I think there is that need for the applause. And I think flawed people have maybe kind of some psychic wounds from childhood, need that, whereas a person maybe more balanced, has a better background, doesn't need that. They'll go into business, commerce, become doctors, academics, and real people. But we are not real. We are the walking wounded. But as such, we become a sacrifice, and I think that's necessary, because I think people need that live sacrifice on stage. And so the clapping is a kind of confirmation, or it's an affirmation of what you've done. And so you go on, and when you hear the clap, and it's suddenly you hear a bravo shouted out, and it's as if something going bing in your system, and it's really kind of totally unpalatable. It's really it's a sickening thing to need it, and some people crave it so much, and actors do crave it. And very often you go for a curtain call. As you go off, there's usually a stage manager or somebody of responsibility, company manager says, go on. You're behind the thing. And then you hear the clapping, and it goes a little bit, and they say, go on, and they're leading. Oh, no, it's nearly, no, go on, pushes them on. And then it builds again. So the person who's in the corner has to, in a way, monitor. And so that last moment, because the audience want to clap, that is the last real connection, in a sense, with the audience. So but it is very, very interesting. And its origins are interesting too, because it comes from early human sacrifice. And that was the origin of theatre. Before there was spoken word, people used to sacrifice to the gods a human being, either by some form of execution, burning. And then the church came in and said, well, this really wasn't good to do this, but we will talk about the sacrifice. And so that was the beginning of drama. So in a way, you're carrying that thread right from the early. So we are, in a way, human sacrifices.
You've just talked about you've got to be up there, and you've got to look at the other guy in the eye, and you've got to think of the words and everything. There's a little telling phrase where you kind of lose it for a moment. Never take your brain for granted. And you're then aware that these kind of little slips are possible. So is that the feeling of going down the tram lines of the performance, and suddenly one of the wheels just sort of wobbles off from it?
Oh, yes, it is indeed. You can have a wobble. And that's frightening, because what you've got in your mind is just, you haven't got the text in front of you. You carry it in your brain, and often you wonder, where are these hard black and white sounds, these words? In the brain, not like a tape or a film, but it's in mush. It's encoded, our words and language is encoded in soft, almost gelatinous material. And you think, God, is it there? It's in the unconscious. I mean, it's so extraordinary. We carry those things. And of course, the actor's power is in being fearless. And the only way you can become really, I think, a good performer, and now a great one, is not to fear losing your words. When you start to fear, oh God, oh, what's the next word? He's speaking, somebody's speaking, and you've got a sentence coming up. If you leave it in the unconscious, you work on a reflex action, and it always works. Don't think of what the next sentence is going to be. But if you think about it, you put yourself on manual, and you keep going over what's the next word, and then you can really mess yourself up. So you have to trust your unconscious. It's like playing the piano, you do it unconsciously. And so when you've got these sort of difficult texts, like I was on the stage, and just before I went on, I kind of checked, oops, that's very dangerous, don't check. I was doing Shakespeare's villains, which is really a kind of a dissertation on Shakespeare. And I thought, what was that line after Coriolanus when he said something? And before I went on, I had put a kind of flaw in it, you see, whereas if I just go on, it comes. Something wonderful in the unconscious, that the ideas will always, then the words will always come.
You're sitting in, I think it's the first chapter of the book, you're sitting on a plane with a guy who says, what do you do? And you say, oh, I do theatre. And he says, oh yes, I tried to get it. I saw Cats once. And and we get some of the bile of Berkoff, quite rightly saying, I think the quote is something that for us now, theatre has become sort of Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yeah.
And drama means the cinema.
Yes. Well, it didn't really meant to be bilious. What I meant, it was really as a kind of a comment that I felt was kind of interesting in the sense that when people say, oh, you're in the theatre, in fact, sometimes I meet someone on the plane and he might have seen me in a film. I haven't done that many films, but some of the films I've done have been so successful that people will see it because it's repeated. Even if I haven't been in them with this particular movie, like Beverly Hills Cop, I did it in 84 or 5, 15 years ago, and people talk about it all the time, but it was only a few weeks' work. So people see me and then recognize the face in order to show that they're in connection with my work. Say, yes, we go to the theatre, we saw Cats in London or Les Mis, and we really loved it. And that's kind of quite charming because they see theatre as popular theatre. So what they've done, Lloyd Webber, is to popularize the idea of the live art by appealing to the middle-brow audience. So as such, A, he's done a great service for the theatre, and B, he's killed it. So simultaneously, he's taken theatre and made it popular and given it and disseminated simple tunes, simple themes, simple ideas, simple slush. But it's live, and actors can work, and musicians can work. But at the same time, you lower and erode the threshold of really demanding, exciting, vital drama.
Yeah, because you're not kind about Weddings and a Funeral. How many weddings was it? You're not kind about that movie. You're not kind about the current drama output of television in this country. You hark back nostalgically to a time when there were challenging Wednesday plays.
Yeah.
So one of the themes seems to be beware dumbing down because we're doing it.
Yes, it is dangerous. It's like a pollution. And as we see every year, the pollution levels, because we have all these smog detectors, increases by about 7.5%. So that in 50 years' time, if it continues to increase, we will be dead within the next 75 years. In the same way, there is a kind of the same pollution of mulch, pulp, pap, simplistic ideas, which is growing, and this growth becomes a kind of algae which kills off all exotic fish and exotic plants, and it's a form of matter. It's of something biological. It can be eaten, but it corrodes, and eventually it leads to the erosion and to the destruction of civilization as we know it. And when you see in countries which have eroded their civilization, eventually they die. So this dumbing down, BBC is responsible for a lot of it. Well, coexistent with that, or concomitant with that, is an increase of crime, because people are bored by television, bored by radio, bored, or kind of, in a way, overstimulated into desiring things that are really outside their realm. Whereas the early drama, say we take drama, the medieval drama, which was religious drama, the passion plays, the drama affected the people. It was about life, sacrifice, the pursuit of goals which were attainable, of purity, of giving, of compassion, of ideology of certain kinds, and you identified with them, but now there is no identification.
Well, as I listen to that and having read the book, what comes to mind is the tale you tell of working on this exciting movie where you're playing the guy who's got to get at the computer to somehow access them.
Yes, indeed, yes. It's unbelievable.
Where a bit of Berkoff bile, they come to get you. I think you say you're third lead on the movie.
Yes.
And they come and get you in a truck in the morning like you're the assistant plumber.
Yes, that's right, yes.
You're not happy about that?
No, not at all. I think I must have rubbed them up the wrong way, because I did the film, and you have to lower your kind of expectancy and threshold of life, and just to accept something on a very low level. Well, I lowered my level, and so instead of so I'm not going to work at 100%. I tried to, but they didn't like that. Don't improvise, don't change, don't ad lib, don't just do the lines, do this. And they want me to play like a kind of a robot. And so, when I went in, I'll do 10%, that should be enough. But even that became, somehow unpalatable to them. And so, I found it really hard graft. And in the end, it was like, they were not only corrupting the public, they were corrupting me, they were corrupting everything. So they spent all this money, something like $29 million, making something which was worthless. And I think that's a crime.
Well, yes, and you are given this theatrical blood with honey in it by some kind woman.
Yeah. Oh, yes, with honey in it, that's right.
And you're there, you're performing. It's kind of a black and white character.
Yes, it's a Russian. He's a kind of Russian villain that is trying to manipulate the monies of the banks and crack the computer code so that he can transfer it into his nefarious outfits. And Cindy Crawford is this dummy who is a lawyer with a miniskirt, and it's all, incredibly kind of a very puerile kind of plot. But you weave your way into it. So what I wanted to do was to humanize the character a bit, to kind of give him some little idiosyncratic taste, desires, comments about life. And
what thanks do you get?
Well, they didn't understand it because their minds are already gone. Their minds are already in the pattern of what they feel that this is what the public want. They want the action, they want the explosion, and they want this. And they want the kind of, the black and white two-dimensional villain. And so, eventually, we had to have a falling out, because I was prepared just to give him a 10%. And eventually, there was such an erosion of everything you believed in, that you felt you were almost like a prostitute. You couldn't bear it. You felt you had to say something, and then this met with resistance, and eventually there was an explosion, and then this producer came up and onto the set. He's a very well-known, he's famous for explosions, in other words, for bullying. Because if you have a lot of power, particularly in the States, you shout it, you bully it, you strut it. This is their way of negotiating. It's a very bullying and country, and that goes right through. They're bullies in the stores, they're bullies, the barmen are bullies, and the police are bullies. Everyone's bullying you.
There's a surprising chapter where you go to Glyndbourne and like it, because I thought you might hate it.
Well, no, I did enjoy it. I found it, actually, it was a celebration of the senses, of music, of art. At the same time, it was a lot of crap. It was so stupid. That's a very simple, facile thing to say, crap. That's kind of juvenile talk. It was full of that kind of bloated self-importance, and the lawns and the champagne and the people driving up and a little caravan of cars, and it was all a bit chilly on the lawn, and everybody drinking their champagne and little hampers from Harrods, and then they drink and they eat, and then they go out and see this opera, and then the conductor appears, and he almost, even he looks a bit stiff, and as he comes out, I never forget the face as he came up, the Glyndbourne audience, the way he looked. He didn't just look, he looked up and like that instant grin, and started playing the overture, and the set was all made of wood, and I forget what the opera was. I probably mentioned it.
It was Tchaikovsky.
Eugene Onegin, yes.
Yeah.
And then of course it had the cornfield and the big, beautiful wooden set. And Glyndbourne had recently been refurbished, so it was all made of wood. So the whole thing was like a symphony of wood. And the audience sat and were satisfied looking at this beautiful wooden set with a wooden floor and the corn gently kind of being blown by the wind machine. And then in the interval, everybody went out and, we have a 1 hour interval for lunch. And of course, it's a bit chilly. And so all the ladies needed to go to the loo. And suddenly there was this long line. So that seemed to take away a little bit of the charm, because they're all in these long dresses and they're queuing to have a piss. And it seemed, here we have the conductor and the Eugene Onegin and the music and Tchaikovsky and champagne, and they didn't have enough loos. And so they couldn't start the second act because they eventually had to, but the line was long, and I described it as stretching out into the crack of doom from Macbeth. And the whole thing was fun. It was expensive, and in a way it was charming. It was a pastime. But it was a good experience. You heard good music and you heard good singing. But it was soporific at the same time.
Yeah, you fell asleep in the first act.
Yes, I did.
I did too when I went. But because I want to go and I want to be processed. I want to change. I want to be changed. If I go to something, if I go to a theatre, I want to come out different from how I went in.
Yes, you have to be changed. Your life has to change.
Yes.
Everything, your metabolism has to change. Your blood, your adrenaline, everything has to change. You must come out feeling purged. That's what a kind of sacrifice used to be. Excited, purged. Your senses are taken away from your day-to-day, quotidian world and given something. And that's very, very different. That's the real experience.
And that's rare, isn't it?
Very rare.
I recommend to you Steven Berkoff, Shopping in the Santa Monica Mall. I didn't even get him to tell you what he has to say about the Santa Monica Mall. Or The Vagrants of Venice Beach. There's some photographs of them as well. Did you take the photograph?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Shopping in Santa Monica Mall. Steven Berkoff, thank you very much.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of ConversationCast. If you'd like to keep abreast of our upcoming episodes and news, please follow us on Twitter with the handle @Convcast. That's @Convcast, CONVCAST. Or like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ConversationCast. And ConversationCast is all one word.